Hi there, this is Paul Byrne. I'm the president of Verzoyo. Today we're going to talk about hosting and exactly what is hosting. Hosting is the place that you put your software that is downloaded from Magento. If you're on Magento Community Edition, it's a free download. You need a computer that's going to operate that software, that's going to serve up web pages, and that computer is called a server. If you're familiar with online or what we call SaaS or hosted solutions like BigCommerce and Shopify and some of those other solutions, they provide hosting, software, everything in one account, one place you go to. And so they manage that all for you. Magento's not that way. Magento's a piece of software and it needs a computer to run on, and it needs its own computer to run on. So what is a host? A host provides you with a server. That server has CPU, so your central processing unit, your processor, RAM, which you're probably familiar with, that's your memory, storage. Storage on your system is your hard disk, or it may be a solid state disk, or there are other storage solutions out there, but you need to have some sort of permanent storage for the data that's generated by your site and that runs your site. And then an ISP, or an internet service provider. So an internet service provider is basically a connection to the internet. These are the things that your host is going to provide you. There are several different hosting environments. Here I'm going to give you a summary of them. There's some cross solutions among this, some hybrids of these, but these are the basic three that if you were calling Verzoyo, we would talk to you about. So the first option is a cloud solution. You've probably heard of cloud computing or even cloud services before. So a cloud means your Magento store is not hosted on a specific box that's yours. It's hosted on an allocation of resources from a group of servers sitting out on the internet somewhere. And your store could not really be just about anywhere at once, but anywhere within a specific data center. So that is the first. The second is dedicated environment. The dedicated environment means you actually have a physical box that's sitting in somebody's data center. It could even be in your own, closet or wherever you keep your electronic equipment at your business. So that dedicated server is actually your own box. It's dedicated to you. You're not sharing those resources with anybody else. And the third one is called a multi-tenant environment. A multi-tenant environment means you take a really nice dedicated server and you divide it up into, say, 6 or 12 different environments for different stores to be hosted on the same box. Give you some example of the cloud services. So in a cloud hosting situation, you're going to have some sort of access to a server. It's actually got an IP address that you can go access. You're going to load up your software on there, and that cloud server maybe using CPUs from one machine at one time, another machine at another time. Again, it's kind of in the cloud. It's a little complicated how that all works. But it also doesn't necessarily have a disk drive or a solid state drive associated with that server. Often it goes through an array that's called a SAN. A SAN array is basically a big array of storage space that is then accessed through the local network, not sitting on the same box in most cases. When the internet started, everything was basically on its own dedicated server because you could basically have one IP address, one URL in most cases associated with a single server. So that dedicated box is kind of how the internet started, and then the cloud came up after that, after a lot of smart people got together and figured out that whole thing. And then multi-tenant environment is really, like we said, it's kind of like the apartment buildings of the internet, where you have a standalone building, but you may have 10, 12, 6, however many stores or how many websites are hosted in the same place. So what are the pros and cons of each of these different environments? Well, first of all, the cloud pros are you can get into cloud for very little money. If you're just getting started and you don't know how many resources your store is going to need, or you're just kind of tinkering around, it's a great place to build your store and to get it going is in the cloud. If you need scalability, but not all the time, the cloud is a great place to be. Example of that, if you do a lot of flash sales, or if you have a highly seasonal or it's event driven, so that you get these big spikes in traffic, but most of the time your traffic's down here, then the cloud's a great place to be because you can plan for those events and you can access those resources. You can even access some of the cloud resources on demand, which sounds great. It sounds, automatic scaling, all this may not work quite as great as you think it's going to be, but the concept is there, and with a little help from a developer, if you're on the right cloud system, you can do it. Give an example of cloud is Pier 1's Mission Critical Cloud. It's a great place. We've managed tons and tons of flash sales on the cloud. We can scale it up. The hard drives are right there on the same box, so it's really fast. You get phenomenal throughput in that situation, and we can scale you up to 10 times your normal traffic, and then scale you back down, and you keep your server costs at a lower level. So you can sort of even plan out what the cost of those individual events will be. The downside of the cloud is most cloud hosting situations do have a throughput problem, and Magento needs throughput. Throughput, I'm talking about from the database, writing to and from the disk. Because most cloud systems do not have that disk just sitting on the same box, it's on the same circuit board essentially, or on the same bus as your CPU, then it's got to go through a network. That network is going to potentially gum up a little bit. No matter how many resources you throw at it, that thing just may not fly. So there are solutions to that. There are multiple ways to do it. It can get very expensive, but if you need scalability and you need incredible throughput, you can go to the cloud. And again, Pier 1, we like their cloud simply because they have those. They have their hard drives directly on the same board that you're accessing. A dedicated server. What are the pros and cons of that? Dedicated server is going to be a little bit more expensive. It's probably going to be for a decent dedicated server, you're probably going to spend several $100s a month. From a pro side though, it's your box. You are not sharing those resources with anyone. No matter what load goes on to the servers sitting around you in the data center, that's your dedicated box, and it can get the job done. So if you scale your dedicated server correctly, and your system is not like either spiking or just growing so fast that you just have to move from server to server to server, it's a great place to be. Dedicated can be scaled. It does take more planning to scale a dedicated server. The multi-tenant environment, this is kind of an in-between thing. If you're not a fast growth company, but you kind of want a little bit more performance than you get a typical cloud situation, multi-tenant could be the solution for you. ZeroLag has a multi-tenant service that they offer that we've seen be very successful. So, I wouldn't discount a multi-tenant environment. It has some of the aspects of the cloud, some of the aspects of dedicated. For our clients, we kind of do a hybrid between multi-tenant and dedicated. We can put clients on a server that gives them the performance of a dedicated box, but it is essentially putting them on a Magento optimized cluster of servers that we've really sped up and optimized for Magento by making sure that the database server is running on solid state drives, that they're behind the right firewall. We can scale multiple application servers out the front. If that doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry about it. But it's more of a crafted solution for many of our clients, and it also allows them to save money but get the performance of of having their own dedicated server. And complete transparency here. We use Pier 1 for one of our clusters, which we love. They have the fast fiber network. They're fantastic partners. ZeroLag is also a phenomenal partner, great host. We've done great things with their folks in terms of assistance and support and technology, we've been pleased with both of them. But that's who we work with at Rosoyo, and our clusters. If you host with us, you're going to be on one of those systems. When I talk about scaling a dedicated server, your dedicated server can be multiple servers. So as your business grows, you may start with one server, but then with a dedicated server, well, first thing we do is we break off your database. So you have an application that's serving up all the requests and all your images and products and web pages, that sort of thing. Like that's all being calculated over here. All the information that's in your database is on another server, and that's kind of and those servers are optimized to talk to each other. We can even add additional servers onto that, so you can scale up in dedicated. I don't want to give you the idea that you can't, but in a cloud situation, you can scale really quickly up and really quickly down. Dedicated, you're pretty much locked into a contract when you scale up. So one thing to keep in mind. So you may be asking the question, how much power do I need? And how can I figure that out? Well, I can't tell you for your situation because every situation is different. But there are some factors that drive the need for more power in a server. And when I talk about power in a server, we're talking about those things we discussed at the very beginning, which is number one, CPU, processing power. Number two, RAM, memory. Number three is storage, so disk space or solid state drives. And the fourth is bandwidth or an ISP. So what drives the need for those resources? Number one is the traffic to your site. If you're just getting started, we can help you calculate what that might be. But if you are just getting started, we might go to a cloud solution because we know we can scale it up because there are just too many unknowns. If you have an ongoing store and we're migrating you to a new server situation, then that power requirement can usually be calculated looking back at the load on your current server by how many visitors, how many pages they're looking at, etc. The next thing that is going to drive the need for power is how big is your product database. The more SKUs you have, the more products that you have, the more you're going to need. So for example, a client that has a very small product database, and we have some clients that have literally a dozen products because they're a very specialized website. Well, they really don't need much in terms of hard drive size, or they may not need quite as much as CPU because their database is so small, it doesn't require as much CPU. So we look at how many SKUs you have. We also have other clients that maybe have 100,000 products. They're going to need more power, and the larger that database is, the harder Magento has to work to serve up those web pages and to get your customers the information that they need quickly to buy. The last thing that is going to drive it is what kind of extensions are you using. So Magento has a ton of extensions available for you. If you're using some of the standard extensions or some of like the front end extensions, they don't really require a lot of additional power. But if you are using ERPs, embedded ERPs on your Magento server attached to your Magento store, that's going to require some resources. If you're communicating with eBay and other marketplaces a lot, you're going to need more power to handle that. We'll take a look at all that. We do an analysis of your system before you even start with us to make sure that we get you on the right system. But those are the key things that are going to drive your need for power. So finally, what should you expect from a hosting company? There are kind of three different situations here. One is cloud hosting, and cloud hosting is really going to be very similar to a managed hosting situation. But cloud kind of has its own hosting, and it is managed by the company. You're going to have some access to cloud, and developers can certainly work with cloud, but it's what's called a managed hosting environment. Then you have managed and self-managed. Managed hosting environment is when let's say you've got your dedicated server and it's in somebody's data center. The server company may limit some of your access to there because they're going to take over a lot of the maintenance functions, which means that you may not be able to tweak quite as many things on your site. In most cases, you can get done what you need to do, but for developers like Rosoyo, when we're customizing your site, we usually go to a self-managed situation because the self-managed situation means that we're managing the server for you, and Magento is a whole system. It really requires that you optimize your server and the application software that you're running and your network along with that to run well. So as a developer, selfishly, we're going to point you to one of our servers, or we're going to point you to a self-managed situation, and we're going to want to manage that server for you so that we can make sure that it's optimizing your store for Magento performance. The base expectation from all of these is that your server is working, the hardware is working, and it's connected to the internet. In a self-managed situation, that's about all that you're going to expect from your hosting company. Now, they are also going to monitor it, and they're going to manage their networks, and they're going to, inform developers of, practices that they recommend, and, do all those things. So we get more out of it than that. But basically, as the customer, if you tell them, hey, Magento's not working, or I've got something wrong with Magento, they'll go out, they'll look at the server, and they'll say, hey, your server's running fine, so, maybe you can get some help with Magento. You're not going to expect them to offer what's called application support. They're not going to teach you how to use Magento. They're not even going to teach you how to install it usually. Some companies out there, they will install it for you, and that's fantastic. One example of that is Pier 1. We work with Pier 1, and they do a great job of sort of installing Magento. We'd like to use their installation and kind of modify it. But if you're not using a developer, they can help you get Magento up and running on your server, which is really great help. And generally that's going to be in their managed system. But beyond that, beyond kind of getting it installed, getting it up and running, if you're saying, well, how do I do this sort of a discount, or how do I incorporate this or that payment system, they're probably not going to be a lot of help with that. That's about it. There's a lot more to know about hosting than that. It's one of the things Resilio does is help you find the right host, help you get into the right situation. And so I appreciate your time listening, but if you have any questions, you want to know more, please feel free to give me a shout or to give us a shout at Resilio. Just go to resilio.com and give us a call or send us a text or an email, however you want to get in touch with us. And we love to talk shop. We love working with merchants, so we'll be sure to get back with you right away. Thanks very much for your attention.